Violence in Minnesota continues into a third night. We'll get to that in just a moment. But new today, Bernie Madoff, the man behind the largest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history, is dead. Madoff, who cheated thousands of investors out of billions of dollars, died in prison while serving that 150-year sentence. He was 82 years old. You can check out more on that story up on Newsmax.com. Also, multiple sources reporting this afternoon that Vice President Kamala Harris will be going to Guatemala and Mexico soon. This 3 weeks after President Biden tapped her to be his point person on finding, quote-unquote, root causes for the crisis at the southern border. We will also continue to follow that story as well. But let's talk about Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. That violence stretching into night number 3. Hundreds of protesters descending on police headquarters, launching fireworks towards the police station and throwing other objects at the officers, destroying property, including police cars. Police say about 60 people were arrested in connection with the riots. Let's check in now with Newsmax correspondent James Klug, who is in Brooklyn Center. James, everything looks peaceful in the light of day. We were maybe anticipating a quieter night last night because of the weather here, but we certainly didn't see that, did we?
No, absolutely not, John. And we were absolutely expecting a calmer night last night. However, it was a larger crowd, starting with the crowd getting riled up surrounding the police department. I'm actually right in front of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, where National Guard still is. They still have the entire police department barricaded. And last night, what we saw is individuals in the crowd throwing objects, glass bottles, water bottles over the fencing, hitting officers and National Guard. They were also, shortly after National Guard and the police department were launching riot control grenades into the crowd to kind of deter them from getting closer, basically doing everything they can to push back this enormous crowd. We were talking thousands of people last night, way more than the night before, and that was another large riot. And then lastly, towards the end of the night, we did see National Guard coming through, where people were throwing, rioters that were still remaining were throwing glass bottles, water bottles at the vehicles. A lot of profanity, a lot of shouting at officers and National Guard. Very tense time down here.
Yeah, and we also saw that very emotional news conference yesterday with Daunte Wright's family members, also George Floyd's family members, a lot of emotion there. And that almost sort of was a primer for this. You can feel the tension there, and that certainly was part of that. James, great reporting as always. James was down the border, as everyone remembers, was on his way home to California, but got diverted there to Minnesota to cover this story. We appreciate that, and we'll know you'll be there, back there for the verdict in the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin murder case. Well, thanks so much, James.
Absolutely, John. Thank you.
All right. Well, a Brooklyn Center police officer, Kim Potter, the one whose body cam you're looking at right here, the one who shot Daunte Wright, could face charges today. Former Brooklyn Center police chief Tim Gannon, who has resigned, said Potter accidentally discharged her gun thinking it was her taser. Yesterday, Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliot announced the resignations of both Gannon and Potter, and he had this to say as well.
I don't believe that officers need to necessarily have weapons, every time they're making a traffic stop or engaged in situations that don't necessarily call for weapons.
But was this one of those situations? Let's take a closer look at this now and welcome in former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, a Newsmax contributor. Bernie, great to see you.
Thanks, John.
To hear the mayor in this situation say that cops don't need guns at traffic stops, considering the criminal history of the suspect in this case, Bernie, unfortunately, this is something that we've seen far too often, where the mayor just cedes control, cedes the narrative to the popular opinion of the community there, and doesn't focus on the facts here. Nobody is talking about the fact this guy had an arrest warrant.
An arrest warrant with a prior gun arrest.
Right.
If you look at his Facebook, there's hundreds of photos, or there was, of him, surrounded by tons of money from drug sales. Here's the bottom line. The mayor's an idiot. Anybody that stands up in front of a camera and makes a comment like that, it shows, one, you're stupid as hell, or two, you're cowering to BLM, Antifa, and others and you're scared to death to do your job. The bottom line is, I would challenge the mayor. I would challenge the mayor to go out with his men and women and let him do the car stops. Let him get involved in the day-to-day operations and job that the men and women in law enforcement do. And I promise you, it would take about an hour, and he would come back and say, okay, I changed my tune.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you have no idea what you're talking about. You get in front of a microphone and you start yapping.
Right. That's what leadership is when you're the mayor of a city. You actually have the type of relationship, and city council members as well. Bernie, this is something that used to happen in New York City once upon a time, right?
Listen, every couple of years you get mayors and city council members and governors that want to cower to the radicals. Lately, it's been going on for about the last 2 years. The bottom line is, they have a job to do. This is all about leadership. It would be much more beneficial to the community if the mayor stood up and said, look, we're going to investigate. We believe there was a problem with this arrest or this shooting, but let the investigation take its course. Let due process go through the course. In fact, the
you
one
get fired.
person in that administration,
Right.
he said the officer has a right to due process. He got fired.
Right.
He was a black administrator in that administration.
Just simply calling for due process nowadays will get you fired here. We also, again, something you see almost in every situation like this, you see Attorney Ben Crump there doing one of these news conferences, and you hear, and I understand this is an emotional situation. Dante Wright should be alive today. If he would have listened to the commands from the police officer, he did not have to die. And it's a horrible situation here. But the term murder gets thrown around as if it is fact, and that is a legal term. I cannot call somebody a murderer without fearing repercussion. That is a defamatory statement, but that term gets thrown around now. We might see charges against the officer here, Kim Potter, but again, this is already charged now, and it's almost impossible for her to get due process.
Yeah, you know what, John? Ben Crump is, sort of the modern day age legal Reverend Al Sharpton. He said every one of these things, regardless of what happened prior to an investigation being conducted. He has no clue what he's talking about either. But he gets out there in front of a camera and talks all this garbage. The bottom line is there has to be an investigation. The investigation will conclude what happened and why. And then the district attorney, if it's a fair DA, they will determine whether that has to be charges or not. But I want to close on this, John.
Sure.
There's two things that people have to realize. One, this is not the first time that an officer in this country was mistaken for their service weapon and a taser. And two, again, I think the mayor there needs to be challenged to go out and see what the men and women under his command do on a daily basis. And he wouldn't be so fast to throw them under the bus.
Right. That would actually de-escalate things as well. Bernie, a couple other things we're going to talk about as well. It is day 13 of the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Yesterday, we started hearing from defense witnesses, including use of force expert Barry Broad, who told jurors that Chauvin was justified in his use of force. How important is this testimony?
Well, I think it's important because you want to get into the head of the officer. And I don't know if Chauvin's going to testify or not, but you want to get into the head of the officer. Was the officer in fear for his safety, for his life? Keep in mind, if you watch the videos from the beginning, John, Floyd, from the very beginning, before he was ever on the ground, was complaining he couldn't breathe. He had chest pains. He wanted his mother. All this stuff was going on as he was resisting arrest. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to determine, was the officer justified in containing him on the ground? And two, what actually killed him?
Yeah.
What does the medical examiner say killed him?
Yeah. And, the other thing, too, is, again, we talk about that news conference we saw yesterday with family members of George Floyd's. We also saw the stuff in Brooklyn Center. They're conflating the two cases. It makes both situations more complicated as well, not helping. Also, Bernie, we're seeing now that Kenosha police officer Rustin Chesky is now back on the job. Again, another guy who was accused of murder. He's the one who shot Jacob Blake 6 times after Blake went back to his car. There was a knife inside that car. But again, you know, he was a guy who was basically accused of murder. I believe was actually accused of murder by the Kenosha mayor. Using those exact terms here, but he was exonerated and is back on the job.
Yeah, well, John, this goes back to what I said. Let the investigation take its course. Right. Nobody knows better than the investigators. And in cases like this, John, you're going to have a local DA, you're going to have a state investigation, and in many situations, you're going to have a civil rights investigation by the Department of Justice. Let the investigators do their job. Nobody knows better than they do, right, and they'll determine exactly what happened and why.
Today's police officer is the most perhaps scrutinized professional in America, wearing body cameras. Everything they do is recorded at all times. These investigations need time. Everybody wants instant reaction all the time. It just doesn't work like that, even though we want it to. Bernie, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.